Chana protocol mingi. Good morning. My Lady Chief Justice Mother Koome, President of the Supreme Court, it is true that this event was supposed to be graced by His Excellency the President. It is also true that he told you and explained why he could not come. It's also true that through your intervention, he asked me to come and represent him. However, my lady, as good lawyers say when they want to disagree with a judge, with great respect, the president did not negotiate with me, and the president cannot negotiate with me to come here. He directed me and instructed me to come. But as I've said, with deep respect. Now, I'm happy to be here in a very familiar territory. I recognize all the protocols of all the dignitaries present, both from the judiciary, the representatives of the executive, and the representatives of the legislature, the diplomatic people, and the justice sector players. Please, I appreciate each one of you. My Lady Chief Justice, did you notice that the 4 people who are sitting on your left, 2 of them representing the executive, the other 2 representing the 2 houses of parliament, did you notice all the 4 of them are officers of the court? That's how powerful you are. And so we will behave ourselves accordingly. In fact, we were consulting there when I was talking to my sister there, Minister for Lands. I was asking her on which side, where are we? Are we in court or where? We need to understand how we behave. So we are glad to be here. The judiciary, not just in Kenya, is a very powerful institution. It helps democracy to operate within the rules and to interpret those rules. But my Lady Chief Justice, great power comes with great responsibility. So it is hoped, even as you launch the report and assess yourself as you deliver services to the people of Kenya, you will also reflect on your responsibility to the people of Kenya, because great power comes with great responsibility. I will not really give a speech. I see some people brought me a speech here. I don't need the speech, because what I want to do today is just to give a few reflections. Because sometimes when you have a moment like this, you don't want to, you just want to be as natural as possible so that you can give your best. So let me just say that this administration came into office at a time when there was an institutional confrontation between the executive and the judiciary. The executive had declined to swear in 6 judges who had been hired to serve in the Court of Appeal. President William Ruto, in his inauguration speech in Kasarani, promised that upon taking oath of office, he will swear those 6 judges, which he did, I think, the following day. From that moment, there has been no doubt that this administration believes, supports, and affirms the place and stature of the judiciary in our democracy. Allow me, my lady, the Chief Justice, distinguished guests, to also point out 3 other things that this administration has done to demonstrate goodwill and commitment to affirming the place and posture of the judiciary in our democracy. 1, this administration is the administration that has sworn in the highest number of judges of superior courts within 3, and if you extend it, 4 years. Other than in 2003, when we had many judges taking oath of office under the new constitution, there is no other administration which in 3 years the head of state has sworn as many judges of the Supreme Court. And therefore I take pride to be associated with the progress we've made to try and increase the wherewithal of the judiciary to deliver services to the people of Kenya by providing the necessary support and resources to make sure that we increase the number of judicial officers and judges. And so far, 51 judges have been sworn in, judges of the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and also the Environmental and Land and Environment Court. Another 40 are in the process of being recruited, and another 45 will be recruited next year. So we are on a good trajectory. This administration also has facilitated the JSC to recruit 114 magistrates, and another 100 magistrates are currently being recruited, bringing a total to 214 in 3 or 4 years. Secondly, the budget. The 2022 budget for the judiciary was at 21 billion shillings. The current budget, the Chief Justice has confirmed to me, is at 26 billion shillings. It is not enough, but there is modest progress. The Chief Justice has also whispered to me that the judiciary will be presenting a supplementary budget request. The executive, working with Parliament, will support that request. The third thing that this administration has done is to operationalize the Judiciary Fund, which has not been operationalized for 13 years until 2023. It may not be optimal. There are a few things we need to look at in terms of both the amount but also the mechanisms of the judiciary accessing and managing that money independently. And some of the constraints are coming from other independent offices which are also flexing their mandate. And we have undertaken to mediate, oversee a smooth understanding amicably between the judiciary and the other independent offices involved in the disbursement of money to make sure that that fund is used independently, accessed independently, as it is supposed to be by the judiciary. So there is work in progress. And lastly, because I don't want to speak forever, is the judges' retirement law. When I accompanied the president here, some time back, I can't remember what was that. I think it was Supreme Court at 12. When the Supreme Court was entering teenage, I came here accompanying the president. And when we sat in the office of the Chief Justice, there were 4 issues that the judiciary, and I know my Lady Justice Ndungu was there, Justice Philomena Mwilo, Deputy Chief Justice, was there in that meeting, my big brother, Justice Ouko, was in that meeting. There are 4 issues that the judiciary raised that they needed support from the executive to actualize. Some of them have been actualized, and the remaining ones will be actualized because we've discussed and agreed. One of it was the judges' retirement law. And I know the president directed me to fast track the conclusion of that law, which I did. I managed to convene on behalf of the president, the National Treasury, SRC, the Attorney General. That law was taken to Cabinet. Cabinet approved. We took it to Parliament. That law will be passed in the next few days. That is a demonstration of goodwill, because it is wrong for people who have served the country in the esteemed office of judge to retire into poverty, where they cannot even access medical treatment, where they cannot even move. They are walking in old age after serving so many years as judges. And therefore, these are just some of the pointers to work in progress towards affirming and supporting the judiciary so that they can be, the judiciary can be able to deliver on the mandate that is given to it by the Constitution. And so that is where we are. I have said a few other things remain, and we can discuss that later on, Chief Justice, and they will be done because that work was delegated to me and I don't fail. I have never failed, I don't fail. The remaining thing, I am glad you called my sister here Alice. She's the one holding us back in one of the issues. It's like you are reading my mind. And when she came here, she spoke very well, of course. But she didn't tell us when you will have the title deed. She said as soon as possible, but that's not what we agreed, my sister Alice. Because again, we negotiated that here with the judiciary, and that meeting was chaired by the President of the Republic. And a decision was made, and I was delegated to follow up as the mtu wa mkono. My sister Alice, you must give the judiciary their title deed before Christmas for this place. And the same way, I am also here because I ought to have been somewhere else, but I was directed to come here. So I'm also cascading my influence and asking you to honor that, to honor that commitment by the President, so that we give the judiciary a Christmas of a new judges' retirement law and the title deed to their land here. Having said that, let me commend you, the judiciary through the Chief Justice, on the progress you've made. The automation. I think the judiciary of Kenya has made tremendous strides in automation. And I must thank the development partners who have supported the judiciary of our country to make those strides. I agree with you, Chief Justice, that we should not lose the gains we have made in automation. It has helped in case management and also the speed of the service delivery. When COVID-19 struck our country, the retired Chief Justice David Maraga rules also helped us further by introducing virtual courts and hearings and filing of pleadings and so forth. Let us not, Corona is no longer here, but let us not go back, because what Corona taught us is that some of the things we do really, we can do them differently and get faster results. So I want to commend you on automation. I also want to commend you as the Kenyan judiciary on the strides you've made in the promotion of ADR, AJS, and mediation. Having done that, allow me to conclude my remarks by giving reflections. And my reflections will be not on the administrative and practical and operational issues I've been talking about, but my reflections are jurisprudential, because at the end of the day, the decisions that courts make, especially superior courts, is what now helps us put together the entire service delivery ecosystem. And that's what guides our clarity on the law and the Constitution. Number one, as I said during my remarks during the Supreme Court at 12, I'll be happy as a law student to see greater jurisprudential clarity on the question of the independence of the judiciary. It is it's a very, very highly entrenched principle, and there is no dispute on whether the judiciary is supposed to be independent. What we are looking for is clarity on where that independence meets with interdependence with other arms of government, because at some point, however extreme, however pure that doctrine is, at some point it will intersect with interdependence. That is my understanding of separation of powers, and the old doctrine of Montesquieu, and all the students of constitutional law in the House will agree with me. Because unless you want to persuade me, which you won't, that this independence is limitless, because that again would go against the doctrine of separation of powers, which in its basic form says that every man or woman entrusted with power has the tendency to push that power as far as it can go. So the only remedy to make sure that no arm of government or no person holding public office abuses the power they have is the checks and balances and the intersection between what that arm or that person does with other organs of state. I have submitted before, and I do submit here again, now that I have the chance, that this independence, broad and pure as it may be, must only be restricted to 4 areas. One, decisional independence, which allows every individual judge and every judicial officer to determine the outcome of a matter before them based on the facts, the law, the evidence. There is no negotiation about decisional independence. That one is pure and it is complete. Similarly, this, my understanding of judicial independence, other than decisional independence, it is administrative independence to administer yourselves, the Chief Justice, the Deputy Chief Justice, the Chief Registrar, the presidents of the various courts, and to carry out your administrative authority, you administer the institution without interference. Thirdly, operational independence, to carry out your operations without interference. And finally, financial autonomy, which is what we are discussing here, how we can perfect that. Anything beyond those four legs, decisional independence, financial independence, administrative independence, and operational independence, you must submit to other arms of government and other agencies for a democracy to work. That is my submission, and I could be persuaded otherwise, but not today. The second reflection is on the clarity that we aspire for around our very progressive constitution. My understanding, and here I want to admit I could be wrong, is that the jurisprudence I've seen so far since this very progressive constitution came to place somehow equates the entire constitutional framework and treats it as a set of norms of equal status. So you interpret the Constitution from cover to cover and assume anything and everything provided, all the norms enshrined in that Constitution enjoy equal constitutional status because those are provisions of the Constitution. With tremendous respect, I hold the view that there is a hierarchy of norms in our Constitution. We have a hierarchy of norms in the Constitution. Some constitutional provisions are superior to the others. That is why, for example, by way of example, that is why if you wanted to amend the Constitution, parts of the Constitution can be amended by Parliament, and the matter ends there. But if you touch other norms, you have to go back and conduct a referendum. That already creates a hierarchy of norms in the Constitution. If you touch this one, you go back and do a referendum. The others you can amend. That is just one example of the hierarchy of constitutional norms. The same document, same constitution, but it creates a staircase of norms. With great respect, I argue that provisions like those in Article 4, Article 5, Article 10, and Article 238 of the Constitution are primordial and entrenched national interest issues which cannot be varied even by the judiciary. If the judiciary attempts to vary those primordial and existential norms, the judiciary runs in confrontation with the people. So the same way some norms are superior is the same way they should be interpreted with care. With care, and I dare say with great care. Because if it is, for example, constitutional amendment, you cannot, for example, amend Article 4, which says Kenya is a multi-party democratic state. If you want to amend that article, you must go to the people for them to decide we are no longer a democracy, we are a dictatorship. So the same way that provision is given that superiority, and there are many others, it's the same way the interpretation of those norms must be very, very carefully handled. And therefore, this hierarchy of norms, we need to see more of it. I brought in Article 238 because Article 238 has bits and pieces. If you read it with Article 10, you'll find bits and pieces of what the framers of the Constitution consider to be the core national interests that must be protected. The internal and external threats to the existence of Kenya are in Article 238. And I'm sorry here I'm a bit biased because in my journey of service to the nation, I have for 2 years been in charge of the national security of Kenya, and therefore I have a bit of bias there because Article 238 talks on what the national security agencies for both internal security and defense must protect from our sovereignty and the other elements in Article 238. The third and second last reflection is on our Bill of Rights. I want to commend our judiciary for doing a wonderful job in providing a good jurisprudence on our Bill of Rights. Going into the future, I want to respectively suggest that the judiciary should help us to unbundle the Bill of Rights beyond the political and civil rights, because that's where we have concentrated on. I see my Lord here, the Deputy Chief Justice of South Africa. I have a lot of admiration for the legal system and the judiciary of independent South Africa. And again, let me first of all declare a conflict of interest. Part of my education, part of my modest education was acquired in your great country. But having said that, having declared interest, you know, there's nothing wrong with conflict of interest, so long as you declare it, and also assure that it will not interfere with the decisions you make. Now, our country has done so well in providing very robust interpretation of the Bill of Rights, but unfortunately until now, we have concentrated on unbundling civil and political rights, which are the first generation rights. Yet the Constitution of Kenya places at the center of the Bill of Rights socio-economic rights. The reason I mentioned South Africa is because the South African Constitutional Court has given us great jurisprudence on many issues, starting with the right to life issues in the South Africa versus Makwanyane case in 1995, the first landmark decision of that Constitutional Court. But on the question of socio-economic rights, the famous case of South Africa versus Sobromani, the man who had chronic kidney failure and was confronted with a denial for treatment in a South African hospital, yet the Constitution of South Africa, just like the Constitution of Kenya today, had a provision saying, very, very clear words, very accurate but very brief and clear words, that no one will be denied emergency medical treatment. And you know, when the lawyers for Mr. Sobromani, who was dying out of kidney failure and was denied emergency medical kidney dialysis treatment, went to court. Unfortunately, the South African court found against him. But they gave us very good jurisprudence about socio-economic rights, especially the right to health. Mr. Sobromani lost the case. The Constitutional Court gave the decision a day like today. The following day, Sobromani died. And many people in South Africa started asking, so what is the business of this Article 27? If the Constitution says you cannot be denied emergency medical treatment, and then the court tells us that this is not enforceable, so what is that article doing in the Constitution? Okay? What is that article doing saying you have a right? So later on, the court redeemed itself, the South African court redeemed itself by clarifying the parameters of enforcing socio-economic rights. Progressive realization, some of the rights have internal qualifiers, it's just access to the right as opposed to absolute right. But at least there was progress on other things around housing, medical, and other socio-economic rights. You have a challenge, the judiciary of Kenya, to interpret Article 43 of the Constitution. It cannot be muted. You must tell us what those rights in Article 43 mean for Kenyans. And this administration has been very focused. If you look at the manifesto of this administration, very focused on realization not just of civil and political rights, the first generation rights, but helping our country also progressively, subject to available resources, realize the socio-economic rights that are in the Constitution. So, those are my reflections today. I have many others. I've been looking for a chance, which I rarely get, because the kind of things that I do these days are quite opposite of, there is very little reflection in the things that I do. But please, help us. Maybe one last thing. On judicial overreach and the political question doctrine. I'll pose a question. To what extent must courts make determinations that touch on the political doctrine issue? Maybe let me recraft the issue if an administration in a democracy runs on a program, when it is campaign time, it's called a manifesto. And that administration is voted in by the people elected and sworn in office on the basis of certain priorities. Housing, health, we will do this in health, we'll do this in housing, and the people says, go ahead and do it. Okay? Because there is another group looking for leadership saying, we don't like this, we are in the opposite side, we don't like this program on housing, we don't like this one on health, we don't like the other one. So when the people decides that we want these things done, it is true courts must always help us at the end of the day, in the long term, to ensure that whatever is being run, if it is a program on housing, on health, and so forth, it is done in accordance with the Constitution and the law. But I'm just wondering why, again, in the question of balance, why is it that as an individual litigant, individual citizen, who is aggrieved by the implementation of a program that has been passed through by the people in a popular manner, and in fact, that administration is now being judged on the basis of those commitments, why should my right as an individual and commercial rights, let me put it that way, maybe commercial rights, maybe I'm not happy with a decision which was made on who implements, who implements that program. Why should my right as an individual frustrate the implementation of a program which has been approved by the people in a democratic place, especially on an interim basis? Why should my right stop the implementation of a healthcare system, I'm just asking hypothetically, or a housing or whatever other issue program, it can be on education, etc., and arrest the progress of 55 million Kenyans? The question I have, why can't I litigate my right as the rest of the country implements a legitimate program that has been validated by the people, in the event that in the final analysis my right has been violated? I'm sure 55 million people can compensate my damage as one person, but the one person cannot compensate damage caused on 55 million people whose rights to the services delivered by this program have been frustrated by interim orders that have taken 3 years to discharge. I submit. Thank you very much and have a good morning. And I'm sorry for if there is any